My name is Rev'd Mae Etta Moore. I live in Chestertown, and I pastor the Chestertown, Pomona United Methodist Charge. I know for me, I had an early religious awakening. I was 6.5 when I gave my heart to Christ, and I grew up in the United Methodist, or at that time it was the Methodist Church, before the merger of several branches of the church. Grew up in the ministry to children during a time of blatant racism was very strengthening. It helped your personality to develop, helped you to deal with racism, and helped you to overcome hindrances. I was in college, entered as a freshman in 1943. You were not born. You don't have a clue what it was like. But 43 was quite a time. And even in New York, there were not a lot of opportunities. But I was blessed in the Sunday school to have a Sunday school teacher who was the first black attorney to be admitted to the bar in Queens, New York. And she was quite an inspiration. She wouldn't let anything defeat her, and she just kept plugging until she made it. And it was a class of teen girls, and we were impressed by her. And there came the time when there were the bus riders that came down, freedom riders from Boston and New York and other points. And I wanted to sign up and talked about it with my family, and was dissuaded. Persuaded not to. Please, what will we do? It wasn't the route for me, but I knew there was a route. I see what I've seen in the past. I see progress, but I see unreadiness on the part of many, that change is slow to accept. But at that time, there were certain things that could no longer be tolerated and couldn't be put off any longer. And I know that some of the changes I feel are needed, even here in Chestertown, will come. I don't know if I'll see them, but I know that they will come, because that is the move of the present. Chestertown welcomes the visitor, and they welcome new people individually to come and bring your retirement income. But they don't welcome kids that are trying to, well, they're beginning to show some movement. But they are slow to acknowledge that this kid whose parents worked on the farm and who didn't finish school well, but's willing to go back now and qualify for college entrance. Yeah, he doesn't have a right here. Let him go somewhere else. Yeah, that unfortunately has been the attitude. Yeah. When I look at historic Chestertown, and I remember who used to own those homes, and I think of what they received as payment to move out. But as I've listened to residents, longtime residents, I realized that this displacement happens other places. There was an area in Centerville, since I've been in the area, that also went through this process. And folks in planning and zoning never get it. They just feel it's good for the area, then it's got to be done. When you look at it, though, it takes persons who are willing to hear from the human side and plan for the human side and acknowledge the loss and try to minimize it, so that I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that kind of concern when I've observed displacement in this area. Can I tell you a story? My parents were from the South. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, had 20 children. My mother was the 20th child. And they would still be in Florida with their little farm after the children grew up. Had my mother not wanted to go to the library one day, she saw some other children going into the library and they were talking about it, and she walked in behind them and she was thrown out. And she didn't understand why, because nobody had mentioned it at home because there was no library. So that after supper, one of the men from the town came to the house and said to my grandmother, my grandfather had passed away by that time, and the kids had all grown up, and they're all neighbors, and they all are friendly, and half of them worked for my grandfather. But still, they said, if you want to raise that last kid, you better keep her out of the town. And of course, my grandmother and other family members packed and left and just sold the property for what they could get and moved north. Okay? But what she had to do then was to teach a youngster who wanted to read more and more, teach him where to get books, know that there are books at the church. Most churches had whatever kind of library they could put together. They had a shelf of books that children could read, and friends would bring books. But in New Jersey, she could go to the library, and that's what she did. She wrote poetry and loved literature. But she had a high school teacher by the time she reached high school who wept when she read her poems and then said to her, "It's a shame you'll never be able to do anything with this." And she believed that teacher she loved, and she never did anything with it. But when you have someone who says, all right, you do it, and I will help you find a way, it makes all the difference in the world. So that these are the kind of issues that we have dealt with within the family structure, the church, nurturing, and in the community to help prepare folk in spite of, in the midst of, and not to be resentful. That's the trick. And it's nice not to require people to take one side or another, but to urge them to realize that there really is only one side. It's self-deceptive to think that there really is more than one side. It's either together we're going to make it or we're not. Yes. But I'm optimistic. Mm-hmm.